Hello, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to show you how to do some quick and easy skin tones in this video. Just tabletop standard, don't expect any competition winning stuff here. More about exploring how to make your miniatures look more interesting just by changing the skin tones. We'll start with Screaming Skull. All the paints I'm using today are going to be Citadel ones, and we're going to start from the palest skin tone and work our way through to the darkest skin tone. I've already done all of the other detail work on these miniatures. Normally I would do the skin tone first, but for the video it made more sense to leave the skin tone until last. It's just a bit more visually interesting. I'm working over a white primer for everything, and our next miniature is going to be Kislev Flesh, which is a warmer colour. Same thing as with that first one, you just put it on wherever you've got skin showing that you want to colour in, and that's all we're doing really, is just colouring in. You can get away with just one coat on most of these, depends how fussy you feel like being. Sometimes a slightly patchy first coat can actually help later on, give a bit of variation to the skin. I wouldn't worry too much about perfectionism. Next one is Cadian Flesh Tone, and this is a slightly darker sort of suntanned Caucasian skin tone. As the name suggests, it's originally for Imperial Guard Cadian characters. You can just see I'm using a middling sized brush here, and yeah, these modern miniatures, they're okay. I don't find them as much fun to paint as the old, certainly more crude metal ones, because I don't know, they just don't feel as easy to get a tool into for the details, and a lot of the details are very, very tiny, so they can be a little bit fiddly. But we persist, and we get there. And there you go, that's your end result. This one's quite a shiny paint, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. Doombull Brown, we're jumping quite a long way with skin tones here. I was considering using something like Scrag Brown, but I've already got that with the other batch. You'll see that at the end of the video. This one you can be a little bit more blotchy with, because the darkness of the paint means it will do some of your shading for you if you just make sure it's in the recesses and don't worry about even coverage too much on your high points. It's a very forgiving colour, this one. And this is me trying to remember how to get the camera to focus on very small things. Gives you some idea of the actual scale that we're working at here as well. The final one, we need Rhinox Hide, which is a very, very dark brown. It's almost black. And when I'm actually deciding which ones I'm going to give which skin tone, I do look at the model for some suggestions. Sometimes the way faces are sculpted and the way that bodies are sculpted means that you get some indication of what would be an appropriate skin tone. For example, a lot of Polynesian body types are very, very heavily built. So if you've got a very heavily built character, you can go more with those kind of skin tones. Some of them have very fine features and are very skinny. That can often suit a white or paler skin tone a lot more. No hard and fast rules though. This is the grim darkness of the far future, so who knows what colour people are going to end up being. It'll probably be a big old mishmash. Once those basic skin tones have dried, it's time to move on to shading. For the first one, we'll be using Carroburg Crimson. I really like this over a very pale colour like Screaming Skull, because it gives that sort of almost translucent look to the skin that you do get with people who have very pale skin. It's also quite a versatile shade, this one. It has a lot of the colours that you would normally find in skin. Next, Seraphim Sepia. This one's quite a yellowy brown. It's Not as strong as Agrax Earthshade, which we'll see in a bit, but it's very good for your sort of normal Caucasian skin tones where you don't want too much contrast and you don't want to wash it out too far. It can also be good for Asian skin tones because it's got the tones in it that you would expect to see, and it can just help emphasize particular appearances. Agrax can be a little bit flat looking. We'll use the same shade over the Cadian Flesh Tone. These two are so similar in skin tone that you can often use just the same shades over them. You can just about see what I've done there. Agrax Earthshade next. This one's a lot sort of, it's more desaturated than the Seraphim Sepia, and this one's quite good over the Duneball Brown because it's not so dark that you get rid of all that red tone to the Duneball Brown, and it's not so light that it doesn't give you the shadows that you need. It's a pretty good match. Agrax Earthshade is the brown version of Nuln Oil, if you like, in that you can use it on just about everything and it always seems to work. And I didn't show it there, but the Rhinox Hide one, I did actually use Nuln Oil on her to get the skin tone where I want it to be. If I was doing a more sort of fancy paint job, I would have probably used purple or blue undertones on a skin tone that dark. Set these aside for the wash to dry, which can take a while. And once it has, we can come back and do the highlighting. Palest one first, and we're going straight back to our base colour of Screaming Skull, and we're just picking out the majority of the areas that are in light. You don't have to be mega careful when you're doing it at this standard, and you can leave some of the areas that when you hold the model as it would be seen on the tabletop are in shadow, just in shadow. Don't put any highlight on there at all. It's entirely up to you how much effort you put in at this stage. I'm just wanting a tabletop standard, so this will be fine for me. White Scar for our final highlight, and this one you just want on the very highest points, like I've done here on the cheek, the chin, the eyebrow, and just on the top of the arms and the hands. Be quite sparing with this. You can always dot some highlights on, and if you need more, add more. Our next paler skin tone is Kislev Flesh. Same method. I'm just going to do the base coat on this one. I'm not going to do a second highlight on this because I found once I'd done the base coat, it was enough. I had the skin tone that I wanted on this one. And that's important as well. If you're doing tabletop standard, you don't have to go crazy with all your details. You get it to a standard that you're happy with and just stop there. That's perfectly acceptable. There she is. Cadian Flesh Tone for the next one. Same method, we're just going over and highlighting all the bits and pieces that we've done. And again, just be sparing with it. There's no point blobbing on lots of paint. You can always add more. It's a bit harder to take it away. And we'll highlight that with Kislev Flesh. Now, Kislev Flesh is the base colour from the previous model. And this is one of the ways that you can add variety through your whole group, is you use the base colour from your next lightest model to highlight your next darkest model, if you follow. That way you can cut down the number of paints that you're using for the whole set, and you can still batch paint them. We'll highlight this one with Screaming Skull, which was the base colour for our very first palest skin tone. And again, just the very high points there, just to get it where you want it to be. It's entirely up to you how fussy you want to be about this stage. I'm being a little bit rough and ready, and that's perfectly fine. There you go. You can see there's just a bit of shading, a bit of highlighting, and it's enough. Dunbull Brown for the next one. I do like this colour. It's quite versatile, not just as a skin tone, but you can use it for so many other applications. And it's just, I don't know, there's something about the tones in it that make it one of those colours that you can use for a wide variety of things. It's very good for furs, it's very good for certain leathers. As you can see here, it's pretty good as a skin tone. And yeah, it's just a handy colour to have in the box. We'll highlight her with Cadian Flesh Tone. Now, we're going into darker skin tones, so you want to keep your highlights smaller and sharper, because you do find that when you go to a darker skin tone that the light bouncing from the skin, visibly at least, it sort of shows up as very crisp, sharp highlights on just high points. And what I'm doing here is adding a small amount, wetting the brush, and then sort of wet blending it out and erasing it to get it where I want it to be. A little bit of back and forth. I do find dark skin tones a little bit harder to do, but they are worth the effort. Speaking of our darkest skin tone, the Rhinox hide, we're going to go back and do that. Now, I'm aware I'm using a base coat. These are much heavier on the coverage. They're harder to work with. But with a bit of practice, it's fine. You can thin them down as well, and they'll work almost like a layer paint. It's all to do with just experimenting and see what works for you. There's not a lot of contrast between the Rhinox hide and the Nuln Oil, so you might not be able to see very easily as you're doing this at this stage, especially when it's on a miniature where the skin is in such small areas as this one is. Once that's done, we're going to go to Dunbull Brown. There's a number of different approaches you can take here. I wanted to lean more into the reddish tones rather than the bluish purplish tones that you get with some darker skin tones. It just felt like it fit better on this particular model. And of course, I already had the Dunbull Brown out, so it cut down the number of paints I had to get out and work with. You can highlight further than this if you wish. You can put some very sharp highlights in. All depends what standard of painting that you're doing. And then as a final highlight on this one, we're going to go with some Screaming Skull. I did find out as I was doing it, I didn't have as much contrast as I would have liked. It looks okay, but I just wanted to just bring the details up a little bit further to stop the skin from looking too flat. This is a little bit trickier than the other ones because you are making such a big jump in colours and tones, going from something that's very nearly black to something that's very nearly white. It's a big jump, but with a little bit of patience and wetting your brush, blending, that sort of thing, you should get a pretty reasonable finish. And this will just help pick out the details and separate that darker skin tone from things like the gun stock. And just see where I put a bit too much paint on there, and then wet the brush, and I could just erase some of it away and blend it out a little bit, and that just brings that back where I want it to be. And she's as done as she needs to be for this. And there we go. That is how easy doing your skin tones are. You don't need to spend a lot of time. And of course I've not finished the final details for the faces and things here. I'm going to let these dry, make sure everything's as I want it, maybe fiddle with them a little bit off camera just to tidy some edges, anywhere I might have gone onto the already painted details, and then we'll finish the faces off. Like so. Again, I haven't gone overboard with the details. I've just done enough to just finish those eyes and the mouths off and just make sure that I've got everything sorted. Finished off the rim on the bases just to tidy those up. Gave them a splash of varnish, and these are now ready to use on the tabletop. And they are a nice, interesting group of miniatures. It also means I've finally finished my Necromunda box set. These are the other ones that I've done. This is the other half of the Escher gang that's in there. And as you can see, lots of different skin tones, gives them lots of different character, makes them stand out a bit. And especially with smaller skirmish games, it can really help you figure out who's who in your gang. I did the Goliaths in the same way. These were a bit easier to paint because there's a lot more surface area, so it's a lot easier to get in at all the details and make them look good. These were a lot of fun to do. I leaned into the old first edition Necromunda a little bit on this, so they've got the hazard stripes on their straps, and I've kept the colour scheme bright and simple. They look really good when they're actually on the tabletop with the Escher gang. You can tell them apart very easily. You can also do it on your fantasy miniatures. These are some Rackham metal centaurs. Really nice miniatures, really annoyingly fragile. But I had a lot of fun painting these, and these will probably become part of my Chaos Centaur army that I've been building. Speaking of, here's some Bestigors. And again, these were a lot of fun. Played about with some fur patterns. And yeah, just have fun with it. That's what painting should be about.